Now, let's get into the characters. As I mentioned before, there are tons of characters in the story. Some that I didn't even bring up when discussing the plot. So, for this review, I'm just going to talk about the characters that played a big part in the story. The other characters that I didn't even mention before, I will still talk about in some degree when talking about the major characters, but yeah, if I tried talking about every character in the story, we'd be here all day. But let's begin, starting with Uatu and Eren. This is a very interesting dynamic where we have a classic reluctant hero being dragged around by this old mentor, though, I repeat, with several obvious inspirations by 2001. We even have a group of astronauts tagging along. Yeah, you probably forgot them, but nope, they aren't just any random astronauts spying on the hyper-evolved robot. They're John Jameson, aka Manwolf, his wife Christian Sanders, and their son Jay, who kinda tags along in Eren's journey. As Eren watches the story unfold, he starts to understand why he was chosen and the importance of the Watcher, but also seeing the flaws as he lets Uatu know. I would talk more about Uatu's character, but I will say that it does reach major spoiler territory, but I will say that he does go through an interesting arc in here. Next we have Steve Rogers, who, as I mentioned in the beginning of the review, in this story, he is pushed both physically and spiritually, though it's kind of obvious if you just look at the toga. This is a man who is haunted by the actions of his past and the fears which is symbolized with both Red Skulls. The Red Skull of the past, Johann Schmidt, who after killing felt unworthy of being both Captain America and an Avenger, and the Skull of the future, Benjamin Beckley, who represents the generation who Steve believes he's failed to protect and guide. But despite all that, he still pushes forward. He's still willing to fight and refuse to ever give up. Steve goes through so much to fight Red Skull, even traveling to different nations to ask for help of fellow heroes who are now running the nations, like Captain Britain, who is now King Britain. Japan is ruled by X-Men character Sunfire, and Colossus is running Russia. And of course, Black Panther and Storm are still ruling Wakanda. But it's very different though, with the population now becoming a bunch of anthropomorphic humans. Man, seriously, first Black Sad, then Fables, now this. I'm really not going to be able to escape these anthro characters, am I? The point is, Steve Rogers never gives up, because though he doesn't feel worthy to be Captain America, he knows he's needed and that he can't afford to give up. Next, we have heroes like Ben Grimm, Scott Summers, and Peter Parker. Now, as I mentioned before, some heroes retired, like Ben Grimm, aka The Thing, who's actually been able to have a pretty damn good life. He's married to the love of his life, has 2 sons, who goes by the nicknames of the Brothers Grimm, and throughout the story, Ben is kind of the heart of this. While the other heroes are jaded by this future, and most of them are unsure of themselves, Ben seems to always be able to keep it light, and yeah, he deserves this life. This character who has gone through so much hell is finally gained peace here, and yeah, it's great to see him like this. Ben Grimm is one of my favorite Marvel characters, and seeing him just have this almost perfect life is pretty heartwarming, I won't lie. Then we got Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, and then we have Peter, never going to be able to live down one more day, Parker, aka Spider-Man, who both kind of go through similar stories, with both of them being very defeated, with Scott losing his team, mentor, and love years ago, and pretty much living day by day. And then we got Peter Parker, whose wife died, his greatest foe is President, and though his daughter May is still alive, they're estranged because in this universe, Mayday Parker is Venom and Peter and the symbiote, well, you know. They both get several opportunities to do more, but they usually deny it. They would eventually rise to the occasion with the growing threat of the Red Skull. Scott would become Mr. S, the mentor of the new generation of X-Men, who started off as circus performers, while Peter would finally do something when his daughter is put under the Red Skull's control. Though he kinda had to do it in a cheap spider suit because, well, yeah, he was too fat to wear the old one. Then we got Daredevil, who, despite the name, actually has no connection to Matt Murdock. This Daredevil is a very different character. This Daredevil was an actual Daredevil who performed at a circus along with the soon-to-be X-Men. And is kind of an egomaniac whose only reason to helping Steve Rogers take down the Red Skull because the Red Skull stole his audience away and demanded them back. Yeah, this is a guy who did this all because he just got mad that he no longer had people to entertain anymore. He's pretty much the comic relief for Steve's part of the story, and yeah, it is much needed because, yeah, this is a pretty dark story. It's always good to have some good comedy in here. As for who he really is, well, that's kind of unknown, though later sequels and spin-offs would suggest that he could be, because of his powers being healing factors and the fact he's a little crazy, that he could be Wade Wilson, aka Deadpool, but it's never confirmed. Then we got Tony Stark, formerly known as Iron Man, and Reed Richards, formerly known as Mr. Fantastic. And oh boy, this is a downer, with Tony Stark pretty much being surrounded by nothing else but technology, and constantly hooked up to so many machines. Much like Steve in Red Wing, he's still fighting a good fight, though it's more in the background as the guy in the chair type of person for the Iron Avengers. But unlike Steve, he's actually doing it under the control of Norman Osborn, though it is made very clear that Tony does not like it and is doing things that, you know, would piss off Norman, but he can't do anything about it. As for Reed, well, oh man, yeah, he's Dr. Doom. No, seriously. Without spoiling too much, after the death of Johnny Storm and the world going through this change, Reed would end up becoming a broken man. He's more focused on his research, cutting ties with most of his friends and family, Tony being the only real exception. He has no one really to talk to, with the only exception being a hologram of his wife.
I said it was a downer.
Then we got the Inhumans and Clea, the current Sorceress Supreme. And now you're probably asking why I'm talking about these characters together. Simple. They're boring. I'm sorry, but to be honest, all they really do is spout out exposition. Sure, they are important since she is the one to help Bruce Banner out when he starts having dreams about Captain Marvel. That's Marvel, the original Captain Marvel in the Marvel Universe, not Carol, and how it could mean something. And we do have the Inhumans having kind of a personal crisis with one of them going through some stuff and trying to find the prince. But honestly, besides the ending and what we learn about them, it just feels boring, and I'm left a little unsatisfied with them altogether. And finally, we got Benjamin Beckley, the current Red Skull and one of the main antagonists in the story. As I mentioned before, he is not a not-so-subtle representation of the failed generation. He constantly makes outdated references, he says stupid things like, "Why didn't someone have a gun in the 10 Commandments?" and barely knows jack about history, because to him, it doesn't matter. To him, it's all about power. History, knowledge, love, yeah. He doesn't care. He can make people do whatever he wants, and what he wants them to do is take over the world for him. And as I mentioned before, he is a bastard. He torments his victims and will make them do unspeakable things, like kill, and for the women, well, though it's not confirmed, it's heavily implied that he forces them to sleep with him. Ew. Ross and Kruger made one hell of a despicable villain, and it worked for this story. Now, before you ask, wait, that's it? We're just going to end with Red Skull? What about Galactus or Norman Osborn and the Celestials? Well, with the Celestials and Galactus, that would be going to spoiler territory. And as for Norman, simple. Despite the fact that he's President of the United States and we do see a lot of his actions, he really doesn't do anything in this story. As a character, we really don't know what he's like unless you read the appendix. And yeah, he doesn't really show up until like the very end. Now, let's get into the art. I was hoping for Alex Ross to do the artwork like he did for Kingdom Come, since just look at it. It's amazing. But I gotta say, after reading, I'm happy they went with the book's actual artist, John Paul Leon, whose style fits perfectly with the more dark story. Though Ross does do the cover of the books, the artwork for the appendix, and designed a lot of the characters. And I gotta say, there are some really cool designs. I gotta say Daredevil's probably my favorite, because just look at it. Pretty freaking badass. EarthX is an amazing story. Yeah, it does have its flaws, but on a whole, it's great. And it does a good job introducing you to a Marvel future that you might not have considered. Thanks for watching, like, share, subscribe, and next time we will be continuing the theme of Alex Ross.